Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1259 of the Locked on Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Monday evening into Tuesday. And today's podcast is brought to you by Arcade 1UP. Bring home a slam dunk and introducing the NBA JAM Shaq edition from Arcade 1UP. Pre-order now to play with the legends. Arcade 1UP is the place for authentic gaming experiences featuring licensed retro games from the golden age of arcades. Today's show is my friend Glen Willis joining me once again for the Player Capsule series, continuing. Only two more, including this one. So only one more after this. But today's episode is myself and Glenn talking about Kevin Huerter in depth. In recent days, we talked about John Collins, Danilo Gallinari, Clay Capella, Nneka Okongwu, up and down the roster, DeAndre Hunter, Bogdan Bogdanovic, et cetera, et cetera. The entire roster, other than Huerter, which is today, and Trae Young, who will be later on in the process. And of course, Trae is sort of the headliner in some ways, but also a guy that we already know a lot about. So keep that in mind as well. But a fun conversation ahead with Glenn and I. First, though, couple of newsy things that happened on Monday that I want to hit on at the top of the podcast. One is sort of the confirmation of sorts. I sort of referenced in passing last week a report from a European site about Bogdan Bogdanovic having a knee procedure. I can confirm that he did. I was told that today. In fact, he had a procedure of some kind done to his knee. No specifics given to me at this point in time. The Hawks have not said anything about this publicly, privately, etc. So we'll see what they announce or reveal in the coming days. And the timeline is a little bit fuzzy. One of the reports had a multi-month recovery for Bogey, and it sort of was framed through the prism of Eurobasket, which is not until September. But of course, he is from over there, playing for Serbia, etc. And obviously, from the Hawks standpoint, they have some time here. They don't play a game for 4 months or so, but still something to keep an eye out for a guy who's signed for 2 more seasons. And I will definitely have more on this when we get some confirmation from the Hawks side on timeline specifics, what he actually had done, etc. The other piece of news came from Woj on Monday. He reported that Landry Fields, the current assistant GM, will be elevated to a general manager role beginning on July 1st. Practically speaking, this is not a huge change for anyone outside of Landry Fields. Travis Schlenk is the president of basketball operations, so he is still in charge. There's some, I guess a couple of people were kind of confused by this because usually the GM is kind of the head guy, but with the Hawks, that's not the case. Travis is in charge, but he has a higher title of the president of basketball operations. Landry's the number 2 guy, and I'm sure it's a pay bump for Landry and a title bump for him. So congratulations to Landry Fields on all of that. But as a point of reference, if you're a longtime Hawks fan, you will remember this. Mike Budenholzer, when he was the coach, was also the president of basketball operations, and he was the number 1 personnel guy during that time after Danny Ferry left. And Wes Wilcox was the number 2, but he was also the GM. So it's back to that setup. One guy, this time it's Travis Schlenk, is sort of the head honcho on the personnel side, whereas Landry is the number 2, but a nice little job title bump and pay bump for Landry, I presume. No other real takeaways from there, other than it's obviously good for Landry, but that's sort of some clarification there, and that's going to be coming, according to Woj, on July 1. No announcement from the Hawks, but obviously they won't do that until it's actually official, which is still a few weeks away at this point in time. Okay, with all that out of the way, we'll have more on the NBA draft coming up as well. As I record this, we're 9 or 10 days away, depending on when you're listening to it, from the NBA draft. We have much more to come on that. Workouts still ongoing. Intel starting to ramp up a little bit on the draft side, trade rumors, all that fun stuff. I had a mailbag that dropped on Friday. I had a NBA draft discussion recently with Ben Pfeiffer, one recently with Jake Rosen. I've had Ricky O'Donnell on the show for the NBA draft. Glenn and I talking about all kinds of players, mailbags, Andrew Kelly on trade stuff pretty recently as well. So wall to wall in the archive, subscribe, listen, rate, review, all that fun stuff. And without further delay, you'll hear the intro. I'll be back with Glen Willis on Kevin Huerter.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I am joined once again by my friend Glen Willis. Glenn, as I mentioned before I brought you in, we are almost to the end of this Player Capsule series, which I think you regret volunteering for at this point.
Not at all.
We've talked a lot, you and I, in the last few weeks. I do appreciate it. Kevin Huerter is the topic on today's show. We were talking before we started recording. Kevin Huerter is still 23 years old. He will not even be 24 until August. He's almost a year younger than DeAndre Hunter, for reference, despite being a year ahead of him in the draft. And obviously, not a guy who's on a star trajectory, but certainly a player who I once again think played better than people realize this year, as we'll probably get into on this podcast. But an efficient guy, in my mind, an underrated defensive player, not a game changer, but certainly not a terrible guy like people might think that he is. And once again this year, he played a lot of minutes. I know you remember this as well as I do. There was this label that he was injury prone earlier in his career. He has now shed that pretty substantially. In fact, he was number 2 on the team this year in minutes played behind only Trey. And he's been durable the last couple seasons. He's been a guy who, of course, is now locked up long-term on a reasonable contract, all that fun stuff. So there's a lot to get into here. But as I have been doing with most of these podcasts, I'll just open it up to you and just ask you where your head's at with Kevin Huerter in the middle of his, I guess, year 4 and year 5.
Yeah, I think he's probably the guy in the team right now that has the weirdest optics.
Maybe.
And I feel like because he's supposed to be, I guess, the secondary creator most of the time, like when he's on the court, the fact that collectively the Hawks secondary creation wasn't good enough this year, a lot of that kind of falls to him, despite the fact that, as we talked about with Hunter when we read him, that he had a rough season, no doubt about that. Cam coming into this season, Cam Reddish, nothing. They didn't realize anything this season, obviously, from Cam Reddish that would have made a difference kind of around creation. But oddly, like Huerter's the one that gave you more of what you expected, I think, coming into the season than any of the other wings on offense specifically, right? He had his best shooting season of his career this year. He's still, a good ball handler, good creator, good passer, moves the ball well, never sticks with him. And he's versatile in what he can do. He's not a guard that's just going to kind of catch and shoot, although he's excellent in that phase of the game. When he's chased off the three-point line, he has a number of things he can use to attack closeout defenders. He's very good kind of getting downhill towards the rim, not necessarily all the way to the rim frequently enough, and has a good mid-range pull-up game. And so I thought this was the best season of his career overall, which is hard to say in some ways because he had such a good postseason one season ago. He was so instrumental in that run, and he wasn't able to reproduce that for sure. And we can maybe talk about why that might be the case, especially on defense. But he was really good, and I feel like sometimes how good he was gets lost in the general sense of disappointment around the team from this season.
Yeah, I think not to, as you and I try to avoid the you're not here to talk about contracts. That's not what you specialize in, Glenn. But I think it was one of those situations, kind of like Collins, in which he got his contract, and there is always the notion when you get paid that, at least from some people, that they expect you to be a different player the next year. Like you're suddenly going to be 40% better because you got paid. And it's he was better. I agree. This was his best season of his career. Offensively, the numbers are very clearly the best of his career across the board. 2-point shooting, 3-point shooting. Assists were, I guess, pretty similar. Turnovers were either at a career low or something approaching a career low rate. Like he was very efficient this year. His shooting profile now is kind of what we thought it was going to be coming out as like a good outcome for him. He shot 39% from 3 this year on pretty good volume. And that's obviously he's a guy who can handle the ball, not going to be a dynamic creator, but certainly someone who's comfortable with the ball in his hands, can pass it, do all that fun stuff. And yeah, I agree with you in general that maybe it was just a function of the team and the overall black cloud hanging over the team this year. But I think for the most part, he kind of did what you expected him to do. And we'll definitely get into this as well, but I continue to think he's a pretty decent defender in a way that people, especially nationally, I think there's somewhat of an acceptance now, maybe for people like us yelling about it for years, that he's not so bad locally. But I listen to people that I think are actually smart, that don't watch the Hawks every day. And it's like, well, Hurter's a bad defender. It's like, well, not really. Like he's got weaknesses for sure. And he's not a great defender by any means, but I think it gets a little bit just too casually dismissed as like, that can't work with Trey. He's a bad defender, all that stuff. So yeah, I'm kind of with you. The perception is interesting. And I wonder, coming out of that playoffs, as you mentioned it last year, when he had, famously the Game 7 performance in Philadelphia, but even beyond that, a few different times, he was more of a focal point at times. Did you expect him to like have more of a breakout offensively? Like what did you expect coming out of that maybe didn't happen or did happen?
Not really. I thought he continued being good at the things he was previously good at with some improvement, which we've already covered. When I contemplate where might he improve as to take a significant step offensively, the first thing is obviously one that is kind of getting better at the rim, being aggressive, attacking the rim, getting to the free throw line every now and then, getting to the free throw line often enough that Bob Rathbun doesn't make fun of him when he gets to the free throw line, that sort of thing. And so really it is about dealing with contact, embracing contact, and being stronger at the rim, even though if you look at his numbers at the rim for his position, he's a fine finisher. He's just really careful about when he tries to get there, right? So that's the big thing. The second thing is getting better at shooting off of off-ball screens, which he's been pretty terrible at it for a guy who's as good a shooter he is. But it's interesting when you think about the players in the league who have become those elite guys. You know, of course, we think about Korver when he was in Atlanta and Redick, you know, in his prime. Kind of more recently, you know, Joe Harris. If you think about when all of those guys became really elite in that phase, it takes till they're 26, 27, 28. And I believe there's a real conditioning and strength aspect to building up to that. To be able to kind of constantly sprint off screens to create those shots for yourselves, or when you're not getting the ball, to keep sprinting off screens to create opportunity, create gravity and opportunity for others, takes a real commitment to conditioning. And I don't think it's a thing that anyone can do in a season or two. I think it takes probably 3 or 4 seasons and some, you know, physical maturation for a person to learn their body, learn what it takes to build up to that. And so I think he replicated good play in the areas where he's been good before with some nominal improvement this year. And those are the two things. Like, if he's going to take a significant step forward, it's going to be his work at the rim and his ability to get his body to the point where maybe he can become a reliable guy coming off of screens when they run floppy or whatever it is they run. So that's my assessment of him offensively. I don't know if we'll see improvement in those other areas. We'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens there.
Today's show is brought to you by Arcade1Up. We have big news. The one and only NBA Jam is back. Arcade1Up is the leader in at-home retro arcade games. They're not only bringing the best game ever back, they made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, a Shaq Edition machine. I've been a big NBA Jam guy for a long time. It's just fantastic to hear about this. I'm not the only one that's obsessed with NBA Jam, and I'm thrilled to tell all of our listeners you can once again play hoops with NBA legends in this arcade classic. Jump clear across the court, set the ball on fire in one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, and no quarters required. Compete with friends and family across all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. You can pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade1up.com for an estimated early September ship date. Arcade1Up is a place for fun. They have classics like Golden Tee and Mortal Kombat and many others at $3.99. Starting at just $3.99. Just check this out today. They're giving away a free NBA Jam Shaq Edition to a Locked On listener. If you can enter to win the chance to win this console for yourself, for your man cave, or wherever you want to put it, at arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade, once again, the number 1, up.com/lockedon. You have until July 8th to enter this NBA Jam Shaq Edition console contest. Do not miss out. Enter today at arcade1up.com/lockedon. I want to ask you about, both sides of the floor, as we kind of have been doing on these episodes. And I'll set the stage a little bit by just saying, metrically speaking, he was an above average player this year in all the ones that I trust. Basically better than average on offense, average-ish on defense, according to EPM and Raptor and all those things. You referenced it a few times already, but his efficiency as a shooter, cleaning the glass, has very useful sort of those percentile outcomes for position. So he was a 61 percentile points per shot guy for a wing, which is good. 71%, 71st percentile in assist rate for a wing. So all this stuff about he's a good ball mover, good passer, all that stuff. Doesn't turn the ball over a lot either. All that stuff. The offense is certainly what we're going to probably focus on a lot at the end of the podcast, but I do want to get to his defense just because you're here and this is what we do. So I said earlier, I think he's underrated defensively, and that does not mean that he's an awesome defender. I think that he is pretty good positionally. He does have some weaknesses, like his lack of strength does hurt you at times. But I've spoken enough. What do you make of his defense? Because ultimately speaking, a lot of the reference points on Huerter, especially when paired with Trey, which is part of the discussion always for this Hawks team, because Trey's always going to be there. I guess one way to sort of view it is is it tenable long term as the primary shooting guard next to Trey, and also in a vacuum, how is his defense?
Yeah, this is the one where for I think a lot of the season I had a hard time evaluating what I was seeing and how that was relative to my expectations and such. And for me, so much of that comes from how good he was defensively in the run up to the Eastern Conference Finals against New York, Philly, and then Milwaukee. I recall sharing on Twitter at one point that only 3 players in that whole postseason had more block shots than Huerter did, and they were 3 obvious rim protectors. I think it was Giannis, Embiid, and maybe Brook Lopez. I can't remember, but it certainly had to do with part of that was the number of games. But even if you like ranked blocked totals in the postseason, the 2021 postseason, and you just looked like to get to another guard, you're going down to like the 24th or 25th spot, no matter how many games the guards played.
Yeah, I think he blocked like a shot a game, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're Kevin Huerter and you're blocking a shot per game, that's actually pretty impressive.
and he had a good number of steals, and so he did well in what the young people call stocks, and all of that. But I have to kind of go back and remind myself, right? One of the reasons that the Hawks were able to make that run with the defensive team they had then was who was New York really kind of putting at the point of attack that's going to kill you, apart from Derrick Rose, the 3, I think 2.5 good games he had. You got to Philly, who was going to kill you at the point of attack? Really, no one, right?
No one.
There. And then when you got to Milwaukee, they still were about creating turnovers and getting out in transition and stuff like that. Even Middleton and Drew, if you look at those 2 guys, they have a mix of things they're good at. They're not just going to kind of go straight at the defender in front of them all the time. That's not what they do. So I have to kind of remind myself that, okay, when we came into this season, I probably had expectations that were too high. And I think it's important to not just kind of create that as a negative optic around Huerter, but to realize, okay, my expectations were too high based upon things that maybe I should have kind of taken into consideration. I still think he's a positive defender. I think he's a better defender than his reputation, probably around fans or around the league might be. Is he ever going to be good enough to be kind of a defensive primary? I don't think that's ever going to happen.
No.
But I think he can switch over and guard point guards sometimes and give you, apart from maybe the best 5 point guards in the league, like I wouldn't want him chasing Ja for a whole game or someone like that, right? But he has some versatility because of his size and because of his length. And he's smart and he's kind of on time with most of his actions, helping, tagging, whatever that is and stuff. And so he's very workable. In my mind, he should be very workable in a lineup construct, even around Trey. He's just not going to be the guy that I'm going to put into my starting lineup and say, okay, I'm comfortable with that guy being the best defender in my starting 5 from a point of attack standpoint. That's not going to quite be good enough. So that's how I see it. Good defender, could still get better as he continues to kind of get stronger and learns how to manage his body more and things like that. But never going to be an all NBA an all defensive team kind of guy or anything like that. But reliable, good, solid, with the ability to. I mean, it's funny. He does make even I remember his second season. He had a massive block at the end of one of the games that they won that year, and so he has a little bit like we talked about a Congo. He has the tendency at times to make some really timely plays at the end of games, and I think that means something, too. So good defender, still needs something a little better in terms of your primary wing defender and your starting 5 if you're going to try to do big things.
Yeah, as well as I do, like there were times, they've used Hunter as the number 1 perimeter defender for the most part when he's been available. But they've had to use Huerter as the number. I mean, with Hunter, both when Hunter was off the floor, when he missed time with injury, or when Hunter's got to guard somebody else. Like for instance, this year, especially late in the season, when there was when Collins was hurt and Hunter really couldn't guard the guards anymore because he was playing the 4, they had to put Huerter on those guys. And it is. I'm not saying this is the end all be all, but it is sort of reflective of what the coaching staff thinks, that they kind of have had to put him on guys like that, and they've chosen him over other guys that they could have put on those guys. Like again, Huerter's not going to be your shutdown, lockdown guy, especially against guards though. Like he's pretty respectable. He uses his length pretty well. Not a great rebounder, but a totally fine one for a shooting guard. His activity is pretty good. His positional stuff is pretty good in my opinion. Again, not spectacular. It's just one of those things where he looks worse because of who he has to be paired with sometimes. But if you look at the metrics again, he's basically league average defensively in most of these metrics, and that's all you kind of need from him. At the same, and also as a team, the Hawks were essentially exactly the same defensive rating wise with him on and off the floor this year, which isn't like great because they were bad defensively this year, but it wasn't like there was a huge split with him on and off in the way that say there is with Trey. In fact, he had the best on-off numbers in terms of splits of the entire like core guys this year in a lot of ways. Like the Hawks were actually at their worst when he was off the floor, which doesn't always say that there's a little bit of noise in that always, but he's a valuable piece for them. He makes a lot of their lineups work. He makes life easier on a lot of guys next to him. Obviously, Trey's sort of his own category, but you can play a DeLon Wright, or you can play a more of a non-shooter type next to those guys because Huerter is a good ball mover and a good shooter, and obviously you have Trey as well. So it unlocks a lot of things. I do think that it would be nice to have a guy or two that were better than him defensively around him. Obviously with Trey, you're kind of hamstrung on some level, but if you're playing him with Trey, your other guy in the perimeter has to be good, I think, to reach where you want to reach, and whether that's Hunter or somebody else, or how you want to put that together, or DeLon, or how you want to use that, you are a little bit limited there. I think that's definitely fair to say. This is more of a big picture question, but I'll ask it to you anyway. Do you have any issue, let's say, with the news that Bogey had another issue with his knee, he's got another procedure, also getting a little bit older, and of course they've been starting Huerter. Even this season they started Huerter over Bogey once they made that change and actually kind of quote unquote worked. Do you have any problem with him being the starting shooting guard opening night next season? Because I know there are some Hawks fans that always seem to land on that being an issue for them. It doesn't bother me at all, but does that bother you?
It doesn't bother me. I mean, except for the universal qualifier that if they have a chance to really upgrade,
sure,
do that, right?
Yeah,
right. But
that's implied, I think. But
yeah. I think he's a competent starting shooting guard. I think some of the things he does on offense helps. With Trey, he's a good enough secondary creator. Could he get a little bit more diverse in that area? Sure. Yep. And on defense, it really does come down to kind of lineup construction. And you and I all get into this to a degree on every one of these capsules. But part of how I evaluate how well Huerter works on defense is what scheme are you going to run, right? So, like Hunter is much better than Huerter at just keeping his ball handler in front of him, and Hunter is actually has his value diminished to a degree when you're switching. Hunter's not as good at switching. He's good at seeing the guy in front of him, working hard over screens, and just kind of staying in that space. Yeah. And one of the reasons Hunter is better that way is because Hunter is not that good off ball. He gets lost, he loses interest or whatever is going on there. Huerter is actually better when he's more in a help position.
Agreed.
Think back to that Philly series. He was chasing Seth over flare screens and other types of off-ball screens, and he's really good at that. He's good at top blocking when that's the kind of the technique that you want, and he's a really good help defender where Hunter isn't. And so even in a way, Hunter and Huerter pair well together because if you can get Hunter on ball, it put Huerter in that help position. Now, collectively, those two plus Trey is never going to kind of really get you there unless Hunter takes that big step on defense.
And that's the thing at the end of the day. That's what makes it so hard. And that's not to cut you off, but that is a challenge. And again, we don't want to do this all the time, but it is reflective of who your point guard is. And he is your best player by far, franchise player, but it does impact your decision-making other places. So to your point, in a vacuum, having those guys pair together, just say Huerter and Hunter in a vacuum, or Huerter and somebody else in a vacuum. But those guys in particular do seem to fit well together defensively, but you have to remember who your point guard is. And it does matter on that end of the floor. And I'm glad you said that because one of the reasons why Huerter, I think, is underrated defensively is just the overall reality that most guys who are better off the ball than on the ball on the perimeter are underrated defensively. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like people, especially people that are not watching as much as we are, not to judge anybody, it is what it is. But if you watch basketball, it is a lot easier to see who loses their guy on the ball, who can't contain a ball handler, than it is to watch a guy make rotations and know where to be off the ball and, facilitate things and hand guys on and all the things you're going to do off the ball. It's a lot easier to see who isn't super quick or super physical at the point of attack and gets blown by. That's an easy evaluation for anybody. Whereas if the off-ball stuff is just a lot harder to see. Today's show is brought to you by Rock Auto. And the auto world has so many models these days, it's actually impossible for local chain stores to stock all the car and truck parts that you actually need for your automobile of choice. And even if they have them, you actually want to endure the question from the person behind the counter. They always have an ulterior motive. They want to sell you what they want to sell you behind the counter in the warehouse or whatever's best for them, basically. Instead, do whatever's best for you. And that usually means, honestly, it always means checking out rockauto.com at home or in your pocket. It's a much better option no matter what you're looking for on the car side. Why spend more for the exact same auto parts from a chain store or dealership when you can order them at rockauto.com today very easily and very profitably for you? Rockauto.com has been in business serving customers for more than 20 years at this point in time, and their prices are reliably low, and they're always the same for each and every customer. They have all of what you need for your car or your truck. That includes, of course, things like brake parts and tail lamps and motor oil and even carpet. And the website is beautiful at rockauto.com. See all the parts available for your car or your truck and see everything else that they have to offer for you in that one spot. And when you get there, write Locked On in the box that asks you how you heard about Rock Auto, so you can tell them that we sent you to them. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com.
And, and to go further around the scheme thing, it's like Huerter, I think, is more valuable when you're switching because he's really well suited for that kind of handing a guy off, picking up another guy. He's a good communicator. He's a good real-time processor. And so that's something else to kind of work out versus the Hunter Huerter thing. Now, I know we don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but they're like if you watch Golden State play, when they're switching, they will do something like we're switching except Steph because we don't want Steph getting switched on. Steph will show hard. You see him jump out and then recover. And The Hawks have tried to do that with Trey. So there's a way if Nate and the coaching staff feels like the roster could handle it to say, well, we're not going to switch with Dre, not because we don't want that because we want him to stay on the ball, So it just depends on not only what you want to run, but how detailed and nuanced you want to get to kind of make that work. And so I just think that there's one of the most interesting aspects of this offseason for the Hawks is to see what kind of potential schematic changes they want to make, especially on defense. And a lot of that will come down to who is the starting center when the next season starts, and on and on and on. But a lot of that will play into can Hunter and Huerter, if they are the starting 2 and 3, are they in a scheme? Are they in a system? Are they in something that helps maximize their value individually? And then as the 2 wings, collectively, there's a way to set them up where they're really going to struggle to deliver defensive value. There's another way to set them up where they could potentially maximize their defensive value. And so it doesn't just come down to how good are those 2 guys. And in this episode where we're focusing on Huerter, but he needs to be put in the right system and with the right players around him. He needs to be free to help a lot, to be that off-ball defender that can make impact plays. He's good jumping passing lanes. He's good anticipator and things like that. But if you're not letting him kind of settle into that role enough, you're going to undermine his defensive value. So a lot of the philosophical and schematic stuff will have an impact in terms of how much defensive value he can continue to bring, I think.
No, I'm glad you said that. That's a good encapsulation, and clearly there's always these discussions, and we'll get into all of them as they make roster changes in the next couple of weeks potentially. But trying to focus on just what he can and can't do, and what he excels at, what he's sort of weaker at, et cetera, is probably pretty interesting and kind of informative as to what they might be doing in the future. And just team building wise, it's challenging because I don't think anybody would draw up a Trey Huerter backcourt in a lab defensively, and that's fair to say. It just sure. is. Even if we both think that Huerter is respectable to better than that defensively, it's a very, I don't want to use the word lazy, but one of the things people do nationally in particular is like immediately write that pairing off because of the defense. And I get that. I do get it broadly because they're not watching Huerter every night. And if you just think of him as a bad defender, we know Trey's a bad defender, so it's like putting those guys together is flames. But I'll say this before, I said this on the Bogdanovich podcast, we have 2 years now of data where the Huerter-Bogey wing pairing has worked very well for the Hawks. The numbers are there. And I get that defensively it shouldn't work, especially with Trey, Huerter, and Bogey. That shouldn't work on defense. And it kind of doesn't. But they're also so good on offense that it hasn't mattered. And they've been very good playoffs, regular season, et cetera, with those 2 guys in the wing and also with the 3 of them on the perimeter. I'm not sure if that's going to continue. We'll see what it looks like if somebody gets moved or whatever, Bogey ages out or whatever. But that is worth noting as well. If you have anything else to add defensively, feel free. If not, we can talk about the offense because that's the side of the ball. It's fun too. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and maybe a bit of a transition here, but when you're playing Trey, Bogey, Huerter, that's your best shot making trio amongst the trio you're going to play there.
Oh yeah.
Right. That's your best ball handling. They're not going to turn the ball over. So you're not creating transition offense for the team. You're not. You're more frequently getting to go back and set your own defense. So a lot of times, a good offensive lineup that you might think would struggle on defense just benefits from putting the ball through the hoop more often and getting to get back and get set. And especially when you have a defense built around Clint's organization and the structure that brings, getting to get back and get set brings even more value. And so, and that's why, two-way play, on the wing is critical, for everybody around the league. But when you think about kind of building around Trey, not turning the ball over really matters. Getting back and get set really matters. That allows Trey to get messed up on the player you want him messed up on, and not scrambling back and randomly messing up. So, it is interesting to think about potentially Huerter and Bogey. How do you, if Hunter is still a priority, which he should be, conceptually if they bring the same roster back. But when they made that run to the Eastern Conference Final, they did it. You and I talked about this with Trey, Huerter, Bogey getting a lot of minutes at the 1, 2, and 3, and were quite successful. And that's interesting to think about. Bogey's a good help defender too, and there's a lot of reasons that works. But Huerter, I mean, on both ends, Huerter is steady. He gives you what you expect. He's reliable. Even if you get frustrated in a few areas of play for him, and there's a lot to be said about a player that gives you consistently what it is you expect from him, because that gives you something to work with around someone not being kind of up and down all the time. And that says a lot for a guy who just finished his age 23 season, right?
Yeah, I have one note to add to that. I just pulled the number because I don't have it in front of me. This is just this season, but the three of them, the Huerter, Trey, Bogey lineup, they were plus 6.8 per 100 possessions. That's really good, man. Especially
really good.
It's not a super. No lineup data is ever going to be a giant sample size, but it's a decent. It's one of their top, 10 or 12 most frequently used 3-man groups this year, and they were really good with that group. So I don't know if it's sustainable, but
yeah, but it didn't start this year, right? That's
it's a 2-year sample. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
the year before was very similar, and of course they had to ride. And like you said, they had to ride that in the conference finals round. I'm trying to pull the number right now as we're talking. I'm see if I can pull this off while we're even better the year before. They were plus 9.9 per 100 2 years ago, and that's just regular season sample. It was probably even better than playoffs. So it's not a fluke. I don't think. Obviously, again, no one between Glenn and I is telling you that's a good defensive trio, because it's not. But they're really good on offense, and sometimes you have to trade off and see what happens.
And there's just quickly, there's something instructive there about putting players around Trey that bring consistency. Because Trey wants to deliver the ball to a guy who's going to be where he's supposed to be, do what he's supposed to do, knock those shots down, and we could, a person could have a conversation about is that the best way to build a team? And you want Trey with the much usage, that's what they are, that's what they're building for. And Hunter being at this point kind of up and down all over the place, and good month, bad month, whatever. I mean, we're still optimistic about him. But Bogey, we talked about when we did his, he gives you what you expect consistently. Huerter's that guy now too, and I think that has a lot to do with maximizing around Trey as well on offense, which we were heading back to.
Yeah. So offensively, I mean, just for the rundown, broadly speaking, people already know most of this stuff, but Huerter is reliant on 3-point shooting in a lot of ways. He took more threes than twos this season. That's probably the right thing for him to do, to be honest, because he's a really good 3-point shooter. But he had a career best 39% clip on pretty decent volume. I always think he should shoot more from 3, just because of how good he is at it. And he's gotten a little bit more aggressive in the last season plus. But I could think there's probably more room to grow there still. 2-point shooting was better than ever this year, but as you referenced before, his rim stuff is never going to be great. And I've kind of waved the white flag on him getting into the line. I just think it's never going to happen. Probably. It's been sort of a running joke, and I think it would help him, but it's probably not going to happen. But to your point earlier, he is careful, but in a way that does work, because when he gets there and tries to shoot, he does make it. He's not going to take any ambitious attempts, but that's maybe better than taking attempts you shouldn't take and missing them. So there's a crossover there. And then passing wise, totally good. I would say above average passer for a shooting guard at minimum. So that's kind of the overall spectrum. We referenced it earlier, but he is, if you have to pick a guy to quote unquote run a secondary action of the main cast, it has been Huerter most of the time. Bogey has the ball in his hands. He's going to try to shoot it. Bogey is a score first guy in this current iteration, whereas Huerter is the closest thing they have to a secondary facilitator other than Trey, in my mind. You can weigh in if you would like to on that. But that's kind of the role he's been in. Low turnover guys we talked about earlier as well. Not a huge usage rate though. Same 3 years in a row, a 17% usage rate, which is not super low, but not super high. He's not a specialist. Like, of course, he got the Kyle Korver comparison coming out of college. I wonder why that would be, Glenn. Why do you think that would be? But beyond that, he's a really good shooter, but he isn't a specialist. I want to draw the line. Like that's his best trait offensively. He's a really, really good shooter. There's a lot of value in that, but he's not Duncan Robinson. He's not even Joe Harris. Like he does more than those guys do offensively in terms of like being well-rounded. But at the end of the day, that is probably still going to be his calling card until it's not. What else should we talk about offensively, Glenn?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny when you go look at his pick and roll numbers. He measures out pretty average if you go by the percentile. It's interesting to think about kind of why that is. He doesn't shoot the ball great. If you look at kind of the numbers there, in the 2021 season, he was a little better. His effective kind of field goal percentage was okay. But like this year, his effectiveness in the pick and roll statistically went down. And we've talked about this in the end too, but a lot of that comes to the fact that the Hawks were encountering a lot more switching in the pick and rolls, which really means what might have been tagged as a pick and roll in the data set ended up being kind of a one-on-one attack or a one-on-one approach with things like that. And Huerter's, not he's average at best probably in that area. He's good kind of getting to the step back in the mid-range. A little bit strangely, he's really good working right into the mid-range and kind of getting to a step back when he works kind of with the left hand. He's not quite as good there. That's something that could come along age 24, age 25, is really working on dribbling with the left hand and getting down in the mid-range and having something to step back to. And so there's some things there, but I mean, I think the secure ball handling is really valuable in the NBA. I think that's undervalued. I think he makes good decisions. He's not overly ambitious as a passer. He measures passes well, and things like that. And I think, maybe the last thing there is just the ball just doesn't stick, Yeah, I think you want him to be a little bit more aggressive, I think at times, especially in late shot clock situations. But, someone that has a usage kind of where he is, it's hard to build up the number of reps. And that's another kind of philosophical thing around, how much do you let Trey just own the offense all the time versus maybe getting Trey off ball and giving some other guys an opportunity to kind of develop some reps. That's a hard thing to do, a hard decision to make in a close game. You're like, well, we got to ride Trey, and then when you're 2 seasons in a row started underwater with your record, it's hard to feel like you have any kind of space to work with to maybe kind of mix it up. We have to optimize all the time because we're kind of, rising the standings. So I do wish he could get a little bit more usage. And I wish I think that might result in a little bit more confidence and aggressiveness. This year he looked like maybe the most frustrated guy on the floor. I don't want to always read into kind of the way. Yeah. But that might come down to the fact that I could imagine, this is me speaking for what might be going on there, is like he may be frustrated, like, oh, I'll go long stretches where you don't need anything from me, and then all of a sudden 3 possessions in a row the ball will find me and I don't have any rhythm. I mean, it's hard. I mean, we'll kind of use historical examples. It was hard to play with LeBron, because you get what you get.
Well, yeah, it's the life of a 4th or 5th option in the NBA. It's just kind of what it is. Like, and to his credit, he's been able to be efficient with that role, but it is a certain type of thing to know that you're not going to have stuff run for you very often. It's just kind of the reality situation. And I think he does well with it. And honestly, this is secondary, but like, if you ever listen to Kevin Huerter, I mean, I know most people, fans can't just talk to him like I can, to be fair, but just listen to stuff he says. This is a guy who understands. He knows who he is. That's a big thing. He does not have any crazy expectations of what he's going to be or how many shots he needs to get and all that stuff. He knows what he is, and that's useful. I mean, especially for a guy who's still young. Yeah, he got paid, but he's not making crazy money. It's a very appropriate contract. I think he might even be underpaid on what he's making. So anyway, that's a sort of a non sequitur, but I think if you watch him, he understands what he's supposed to do. One thing I want to mention before I forget: the last 2 seasons, he's a 90th percentile mid-range shooter according to Cleaning the Glass. And that's anything from 4 feet to the 3-point line. So it's a long, basically anything that's not a rim attempt inside the arc. He's 90th percentile. Now the volume's not huge. That's the thing about Huerter is, again, like we said before, he's not taking a ton of those shots, but he's a good floater guy. He's a good pull up 18-footer guy. And like him, Bogey, and Trey, you don't find many better like pull up mid range shooters than those guys. I mean, obviously, other than like KD and like Kyrie, that kind of stuff, but like non-stars, Huerter and Bogey are both awesome at that. And that's an underplayed thing because it's not the most efficient shot in the world. But if you can shoot 40, like this year, he shot 49% on non-paint twos. That's a really good number, like really good number. It's very valuable, especially late in the shot clock. As you mentioned earlier, if you get stuck, he can get a shot off. It's not always going to be the most aggressive shots always from him, but he's not someone that has to have everything created for him. Like he's a good catch and shoot guy. But again, going back to him not being Duncan Robinson, like Huerter can get his shot off by himself. He can do that. He's proven that. That's why he was a top 20 pick. If he had just been a specialist, he wouldn't have gone in the top 20, and they knew that. So there's a lot there. He's not going to be a 20-point scorer, but he can get out there. If they give him more usage, he probably could, I don't know, he could average 60 points a game, something like that. I think it's like more like 12 or 13 now, but he's efficient and effective. I'm probably repeating myself, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, and that's his mid-range success is probably part of his calculation of why he doesn't go to the rim more often. He probably thinks like, well, I have a better shot of producing points here from 10 feet or whatever, and feeling comfortable there. So I mean,
he was better this year at the rim. Also, by the way, it was like a few percentage points more, but he was like league average among wings at the rim this year, which you'll take from Kevin Huerter. Like the volume again, the volume is below league average. I don't want to say anything else beside that, but he has improved there too. I mean, I'm looking at his clean last page. Everything basically across the board has improved for him almost year over year. It's not quite that linear, but it's close. Like he continues to get better in every season, and that's how it's supposed to work. It's not always linear, but for a guy who's 23, those incremental improvements do really help you, especially when you're getting into the point where now he's actually making real money and they're going to have to play him or trade him or whatever they're going to do with him. It helps to get better every year and know that's going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. I think where I would like to see the aggressiveness is when they're facing a lot of switches and Trey draws the big out, the ball rotates. I'd like to see him kind of pounce when the rim protector is pulled away from there. And he has the length and the athleticism, I think, to be good, putting pressure on the defense that way. So I think that at times he's a little bit too selective and could be more aggressive. That could just be a growth and maturation thing. All the switching the Hawks saw this year and the reduced amount of drop coverage they saw from opposing teams was a brand new thing this year for all of them. And at times they struggled with that, not just him. So, I mean, but we're talking about some secondary areas where he could, kind of improve. The nice thing is that we talk about that while he is giving you all the reliable stuff that you expect him to bring. That's what's so valuable. I think it's easy to go, hey, 3-point shooter, secondary creator, secure ball handler, help move the ball, et cetera, great. To add more, it's, attacking the rim when the rim protector is pulled out of the paint. It's being more decisive, more aggressive situationally, and those sorts of things. And I think that makes that a realistic area to potentially to kind of see that improvement. And that can go a long ways. I mean, another part comes back to, are we going to see any philosophical change on offense next season? When they run floppy, it's mostly for Bogey. And Bogey's by far the best at taking advantage of that. Huerter's, we talked about earlier, not great shooting off-ball screens and things like that. But they don't even work like flare screens for him. They don't run the exit action where he gets a kind of a screen from a big man on the weak baseline. They don't run that for him as much as they used to. So I thought they got less diverse offensively this year, and I think that maybe that kind of eroded some opportunity for him to kind of do some things where his strengths show up more. And we'll see, if that team is kind of going in twos. And I'm always going to think about, okay, not just the player, but like we talked about on defense, the things that you do on defense is going to set him up, deliver more value, less value, depending upon how that aligns with the strengths. Same can be true on offense. It's interesting to think about if the Hawks are trying to construct, themselves to be a true contender, where does Kevin fit into kind of that model, right?
Yep.
I think when you look at that, if he were the first guy off the bench on the next really good Hawks team, that wouldn't be heartbreaking, right?
Yeah, that honestly, that might be, and this is not an original thought for us. I don't think it's like that might be his best role on it, especially on a team with Trey. And again, I don't think that fit is as bad as some people do, but I think ultimately, realistically, it might fit better to have Huerter as your third guy in the backcourt than your starting shooting guard on a title contending team with Trae Young, just because you probably want a little bit better, more athletic defender next to him. It's just kind of what you might need to have. But that isn't to say they can't do. I mean, they obviously just made the conference finals with Kevin Huerter as a 35 minute a game starter. That happened. So the ceiling is a little bit lower with that. But I find it fascinating. Honestly, I mean, he's not as famous or as prominent as a guy like Collins or a guy like Capella, even to where the attention is not paid for that. But like, I really am fascinated as to like what they see from Huerter. I mean, and Bogey too. We talked about Bogey on the same podcast with Bogey. But like the two of them are both interesting guys and they have some decisions to make. I mean, no one should be surprised if Kevin Huerter is traded in the next year. That wouldn't stun me at all. It just wouldn't because everybody's available. It is what it is. But like taking a step beyond that, what is the role that they think he should be in? Like right now, he kind of has to be in the role he's in. It worked very well. There's reasons to want to stagger Trey and Bogey because of the way that Bogey hunts his shot in the way that nobody else does other than Trey on the roster. So I think if you just tell me that you're bringing everybody back on the perimeter, I would start Huerter and bring Bogey off the bench. I think those guys fit best in those roles with who they have on the roster right now. But you and I both probably agree. I think you can correct me, but this is not a championship level perimeter rotation right now in my mind.
Correct.
Obviously, Trey is Trey. Leave him on the other side, but like. I think realistically, they're not going to win the title with these perimeter guys. So, like, what's the next step? I have no idea.
Right, and that's the kind of the puzzle that Travis Schlenk is having to kind of work on right now. Is like, where is the upgrade that kind of gets us up another tier in the league? What does that look like? And like I said, if there's an opportunity to go get like an all-star level 2 or a guy they think is on his way to being an all-star level performer at the 2, I don't think it kills you to bring him off the bench. And especially if we think about the possibility that Gallo's not back, they're going to need to find a way to get more offense on the second unit. And then they're going to need more of Huerter's creation with the bench. Like if the Gallo's not there to help kind of, with that creation. And so it's going to really come down to, what is their 9-man or 10-man rotation look like? First unit, second unit. What is that, do they have enough offense on both kind of lines, both lineups, and all that stuff, if you will? And the nice thing about Huerter is that if the right thing to do is to plug him in as a starting 2, I think you're going to get a reliable type of contribution from him. If it just so happens that you're able to kind of upgrade at the wing to the point that he slides to the second unit, totally functional. And it's not a guy that you're embarrassed to play as your first guy off the bench at all. And so I think that's a nice kind of commodity to have for them right now. And it's sort of like we talked about with Clint in the last episode. He's helpful if he's on your team. He's helpful if you need to make a move because there's going to be a market for him. There aren't a lot of guys his size who have the kind of offensive skill set that he has and the ability to make some impact on defense.
Yeah, one of the brighter spots, not to go crazy about this now, but one of the brighter things about this core, the extended core as it is right now, is that they have no bad contracts. I mean, every single one of their guys, whether you like them or not, whether you are a fan of those players or not, from Huerter to Bogey to Collins to Capella, those guys are all on good contracts, or at least pretty good, very movable contracts. So like that is a positive to be able to pivot if they want to. And it seems like they kind of do want to pivot on some level.
Right.
All those guys have positive trade value in my mind. Every single one of them. Maybe if Bogey's knee is just like cooked, that'd be the only reason why he wouldn't have it. But everybody else seems to have positive value in my mind as a trade asset. So yeah, it makes it interesting. To put a fine point on Huerter individually before we get out of here, I think what you said earlier is perfect in that he's a perfectly solid starting shooting guard in the NBA. And I think he's got room to keep improving. I think it's if you're an awesome team, maybe you want him as a 6th man or 7th man, but he's a perfectly fine starter. He just is. And I think taking a step back to where he was drafted, what you're paying him, everything's gone well with Kevin Huerter so far. It's not an A+, it's not a grand slam, but like it's strongly above average from draft pick to development to contract extension. It's all in a very good place in my mind for Kevin Huerter.
Yeah, and if you told any team that this is what you get from the 19th pick, they'd take it in a heartbeat.
Great outcome. I mean, the Hawks are 2 of 2 with number 19 overall. Obviously,
Indeed.
Collins is an even bigger home run. Maybe you say Huerter is a double, but regardless, like that's a very, very, very good outcome. Collins is a great outcome, like capital G, great outcome at number 19 overall, but Huerter's a really good one as well. And I'll say the same thing about this year's draft. 16 is higher than 19, but last year was 20 with Jalen Johnson. If you get a top 7 rotation guy at that spot, you have succeeded with that pick.
Agreed.
And Huerter
Agreed.
definitely, and Huerter is definitely that. Even if you don't like him, I get that. There are people that are a little bit lower on him. I hope we can agree that he's at least a rotation player because he obviously is, very obviously. So
Agreed.
there you go. Well, Glenn, please add any final thoughts if you have them. If not, we're gonna go watch the finals because it's Monday night.
Let's go watch the finals. Herder is so predictable that if you're trying to go too long, you'll find yourself trying to find the fourth way to say the same thing you already said. So
yes,
I think we can leave it there.
Well, there you go. Thank you, sir, for joining me. People should be following Glenn everywhere. But one more time, in case people are just finding the podcast now, or if you have Kevin, big Maryland supporters that are just Kevin Huerter listeners, Glenn, where can they find your work?
At Willis_Glenn on Twitter. You'll find my kind of commentary on all things Hawks and the broader NBA. Peachtree Hoops is my writing outlet. Right now we're draft coverage. So my Jalen Williams profile came out the morning we recorded this. One of the players I'm most excited about the possibility of being there 16 for the Hawks. So I put a lot into that one. And then the ATL and 29 podcast with our good friend Kevin. We're at about once a week here right now. As we get closer to the draft and the moratorium, will certainly kind of pick up.
Hi, Kevin. As for everybody else, thank you for listening to the podcast, everybody. We have one more of these. I candidly will not guarantee when that's coming. We'll talk about Trae Young at some point, but he is the only guy on the roster that we knew wouldn't be traded. So we saved him for the end. And Trae might, honestly, Glenn, that might be in mid-July at this point. I have no idea when we're going to talk about Trae Young, but it's going to happen at some point when Glenn has free time and I have free time. We'll make that happen. But in advance, I thank you for all the other content we've done in the last couple of weeks.
My pleasure. It feels like the Hawks will decide when we do trade, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I was trying to plan some stuff. I was like, you know what? They might make a trade tomorrow. I have no idea what's going on. So just keep that in mind, folks. We have one more coming with Glenn and I. But in the meantime, check out Glenn's stuff. Check out Peachtree Hoops. Check out this podcast, ATL 129. Subscribe, rate, review, all that fun stuff. We'll see you next time.